do it. All right. Hi, everyone. You ready for this? All right. I'm so excited to have with us tonight Moshe Kasher. And I know that many of you know Moshe because in Rabbi Kasher's time here, you got to know this one. But I'm gonna give you a little bit of his bio so that you have a sense of some of his of some of the work he did before this book with the best cover that I've seen maybe on any book ever.
Oh, it's no amen effect, but I appreciate the compliment.
Oh, sorry. Aside from mine.
Yeah.
Lauren Sazarad designed a beautiful book for me. But this is awesome. This is great.
Thank you.
Okay. Moshe Kasher is a stand-up comedian, a writer and actor. Many of you heard him live when he performed at one of our fundraisers just a couple of years ago. When I learned that rule number one of stand-up comedy is you're not allowed to give them rules, because then they'll only want to break them. So I learned that the hard way, and I am not giving any rules tonight. So I'm hoping you're going to use your best judgment.
My 6-year-old is in the building, so I'll give myself some rules.
I was wondering, your 6-year-old came over during Kabbalat Shabbat and said, my daddy wrote that book. My daddy wrote that. And I was like, you didn't read it though, right? Right.
She's gifted, but she's not quite ready for the concepts that I outline in the book.
Okay.
But she could definitely handle the language. She reads Proust and stuff like that, but she's not ready for the puerile jokes that I have brought to the stage.
I just wonder at what age you will let her read your book.
Well, that's an interesting question. Is that the first question?
No.
No, because I can answer it.
I'm still in your bio.
Oh, yeah, my bio.
He's the author of Kasher and the Rye, which, by the way, my sister picked up in a bookstore just because she said, this is the best title of a book I've ever seen, and she gave it to me, and I'm like, you know that's David Kasher's brother, right? And she did not know that at the time. So,
if anybody's confused in the audience, yeah, there's a similarly titled book called Catcher in the Rye, and it was
derivative.
No, it wasn't derivative. It was like a weird coincidence. I found out about it after I wrote my book.
He has written for many TV shows and movies, including some that I'm sure people in this room know and love, Betty and Comedy Central's Roast and Another Period and Zoolander 2.
The good Zoolander.
And Wet Hot American Summer and many more. He also has this Netflix special called Moshe Kasher Live in Oakland and the Honeymoon Stand-Up Special, and he's appeared on Curb Your Enthusiasm.
I will appear on Curb Your Enthusiasm in 4 weeks.
What?
Yeah. So that's exciting.
And Shameless and The Good Place and other fun things. Okay. He also co-hosts the Endless Honeymoon podcast with his wife, Natasha. And we are just so thrilled that you're here to talk about your book. This is going to be a fun one.
I'm super thrilled to be here too, and I can actually and honored, and I can actually answer your first question that you didn't mean to be the question by saying today's my daughter's 6th birthday, and today that means that it was 6 years ago today that my brother was interviewing with you for his job here, because he came to the hospital the day that she was born, and today is also the day that this book entered the national bestseller list today, and it's, to me, this is also my final live event for this book. I'm ready to stop talking about it. And to me, like, this is a kind of bashert feeling of like the circle of David coming to be close to me, my family who's watching from Zoom, my mother and stepfather, my daughter being born, and the gravitational pull that she had on our whole family, and that you welcomed David and our whole family into this community. It feels like a perfect way to end my book tour, and so thank you for having me.
Beautiful. Thank you for being here. You know why we hired your brother?
For this event,
yes.
Eventually to occur.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I also want to lift up that same weekend when you were here, a beloved member of our community died on Friday night, and his name was Jordan Hoffman, and I lift his name up, and also with great love hold his mother Ellen. And I know that she really wanted to be here tonight because she said Jordan loved to laugh, and I want to laugh a little bit too. So may his memory always be a blessing. And
Amen.
And it feels so much a part of the spirit of the conversation that we're about to have. So I'm glad that we're able to find all these connections.
And I wanted to say one more thing. While this book is not for your father-in-law, it is definitely for the 8th and 9th grade community of Dallas, Texas.
Oh my God.
And I was really crestfallen when I found out they weren't going to make it to this talk, because I wrote this for them. If you're watching on Zoom, this one's for you, Dallas.
Oh my gosh. This is so good, because Levi always sneaks out of the room during the talk, and this is the one he's going to really want to be in. So we'll see if he picks up on that. First thing I want to say is wow, what an easy time for a Jewish author to bring a book into the world. People love Jews. It's like... It's a dream come true. How's it been?
Actually, the last 9 months? Good, really good. It's so bizarre to have written a book with a deconstruction of Jewish history and anti-Semitism in comedy form, and pre-October 7th. It's such a strange experience. I'm glad that I didn't say some things, and I don't know what I would add, but it's been such a surreal experience to have these conversations that I wasn't ready for, and I don't think any of us were really ready for. But I guess that's that's the story that Jewish writers and Jewish public figures have had to deal with forever. You know, like Shalom Aleichem, who was a friend of my grandfather's. My grandfather was also an author and a Yiddish novelist. He wrote a book called Some Laughter, Some Tears. And I feel like I could have just written that title and been done with my book, because to me that's the story of our people, that's the story of our community, it's got to be both. I've been thinking about that a lot. Like, it's got to be both. You cannot ignore the pain and the tears that and the guilt and the anger and the frustration. You can't ignore that part of our people and our history, but you also can't allow that to swallow your Jewish experience whole. You have to find the laughter, and that is why I feel like I'm glad that I wrote this book the way that I did, because we can laugh and we can cry together.
Amen. Amen. I love that so much. That really resonates. We're going to come to the anti-Semitism part, but I want to actually start. I want to go a little bit in order if we can. Okay. And I think that there are two major takeaways for me from the book. The first is that I'm a very, very boring person. My life story is so uninteresting, Moshe. This is wow.
Gotcha.
Wow.
It worked.
Okay. Number
Yes.
two, you and David Kasher, Rabbi David Kasher, are an absolute wonder. I mean, the fact that you exist in this world as you are is extraordinary and exceptional, and the gifts that you both have and what you share, the joy and the meaning that you have both brought into the world is absolutely astonishing. And I just kudos to your mother and also to your father. But I know that your mother is also watching, and so this is I was just grateful for the gift of the Kasher brothers in the world, as I read. Okay.
Thank you.
So can you? I want to ask if you'll just set the scene for us. Can you tell us about the six stages here? And then I want to start with AA, but I'd love if you can sort of give us the premise of the book, the Subculture Vulture. What's going on here?
Well, this is like an anthropological kind of scrapbook of the 6 universes that have created me. and they don't seem like they fit together in any logical framework. And in some ways they don't, but they fit together perfectly in me and in my life. And I couldn't have gotten to me without all 6 of these worlds. And they are in order: Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps. I got sober. I got out of rehab for the last time at 15, almost 16 years old, and I've been sober ever since. I'm almost 45 now, so it's been, I would say, perhaps too long. Raves and the underground music EDM scene of San Francisco. When I was about a year sober, I started to realize that I needed a young life. I couldn't do recovery bowling with 65-year-old Vietnam veterans for the rest of my life, and so I bought a ticket to a rave, and it like changed my life again. I walked through another portal in the universe and just found my people another time, and I became a rave promoter, a DJ, and unfortunately. There's my daughter, an ecstasy dealer, all while clean and sober. From there, I found out that there was a rave in the desert in 1996 called Burning Man, and that was all that I needed to know to pack a 1991 Ford Escort full of 5 other rave scumbags and drive out to Burning Man and find that it was, I don't know what it was, but it was definitely no rave. It was the most dangerous mind-melting experience I'd had in my life, and it shifted me in a permanent way. And eventually, I became a professional stand-up comedian, which is the reason that I was able to write a book. But then the 2 universes that I was born into, and I think the 2 subcultures that aren't even, they're a bit of a cheat, I love you, they're a bit of a cheat, they're not really actually subcultures at all, are the world of deafness and American Sign Language. I was born to 2 deaf parents, my half-sister, my half-brother, my stepsister, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, they're all deaf. My brother and I are 2 of the only hearing people in our direct family, and I became a sign language interpreter for 15 years. And then, of course, the world of Judaism and the Chassids. My father, when my mother left my dad, when I was 9 months old, sought refuge in the answers of the oldest world he could find, and that was in the world of Judaism. And then eventually in Hasidus, he married a woman that was a Satmar, and I spent my summer vacations cosplaying as Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof, while the other 9 months of the year I was in Oakland Public Schools, a completely secular kid. I had a 1/16 ultra Orthodox Jewish experience. And the rest of the time, I was just a kid from Oakland. Honey, you can't do this the entire time. I love you. Oh, yeah, Jeremiah, will you steal my child? Yeah. Frida, come out of there, please. Okay. Happy birthday. So that's me in a nutshell.
Wow.
And so each 6 of these 6 subcultures are dealt with in a comedically historical way, and then at a certain point I enter the narrative and I tell the story of my time there.
I mean, what's amazing about the book is that your story is astonishing. I mean, any one of these 6 would be a book, and would be quite a life, and the fact that you actually were so deeply immersed in each of these 6 spaces and still are, to some extent, connected to all of them, to most of them, is really astonishing. It's funny, it's outrageous, and also I learned a lot reading this book. I mean, there's so many things in here that I didn't know before, because you really do kind of a deep dive into the history of each of these movements in ways that I just found really surprising and heart-stretching for me. So let's start with AA. This was one of my favorite sections, so I want to start with this, because you write that at the heart of Alcoholics Anonymous was the idea that Bob and Bill came up with, which is the way that we help ourselves is when we're of service to others, which obviously is something that speaks to me. I think you called it a spiritual Ponzi scheme in the book. And
right, the pyramid doesn't work unless it keeps growing. And
right.
So AA had to start building a pyramid.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it connects right back to our people, building pyramids. That's kind of what we do.
And Burning Man, where you have that great line, like,
well, what's more Jewish than dancing around an idol in the desert?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, we'll get there. We'll get to Burning Man. But this idea that they came up with, that the way that you can become well is by helping someone else who's unwell also. And so I would love if you could talk a little bit about that, and also about the best New Year's of your life.
Oh, the best New Year's of my life. Well, my problem was that I got sober on December 25th, 1994. And that was a coincidence. It had nothing to do with the birth of our Lord. But the unfortunate reality of it was that by the time New Year's came around, I was 6 days sober, and I was 15 years old, and I was faced with a dilemma because I got invited to a party that night, and like a real party, and I was not invited to many parties at that time. My social circle, I know what I look like now, but the boys that I grew up with, we were like the kind of guys who would like come to your party, throw the keg through your window, call your mom a bitch, and then leave. Like that was our kind of energy, and that kind of dried up our social engagement calendar. And we were not invited to a lot of parties, but we got invited to this party, and I knew in the marrow of my still forming bones that to go to that party meant to drink again. I knew it because I was 6 days sober, and I was vulnerable. And on the one hand, you think it's 6 days, like what's the big deal? Start over the next day. But on the other hand, it was 6 days. It was the longest stretch that I'd gone without getting high or drinking since I had started. And I knew that if this was my chance. This was a window for me to walk through, and that there was no guarantee that the window would be open on New Year's Day. And I did have another option. I got invited also to an AA dance. Now, for those that have never been to an AA dance, I'll just picture like Studio 54 in its heyday, right? Like picture Coachella, the EDM tent at Coachella, right? But the headliner's off stage and everybody's like gathered in the EDM tent to like squeeze a little bit more life out of their party. Picture that, right? You got that picture? All right, now picture the exact opposite of that. That is what an AA dance is like. Now picture a Vietnam veteran with an emphysema tank like shaking his tail feather to It's Raining Men. Like that's essentially the choice that I had to make. I was 15 years old, and my choice was between a cool teenage party or going to the Danville Vets Hall and going to an AA dance. And I chose the AA dance, and it was the worst. It was the worst. I found the one person under 18 at this AA dance. We sat under a fluorescent light and smoked Newports all night and talked about how much life sucked. And then at 12:01, my mommy came and picked me up, and I went home, and that was it. That was my first New Year's. It was my first sober New Year, the worst New Year's of my life. Since that time, I've traveled around the world on New Year's. I've gotten to be a headlining comedian. I've gotten to DJ at raves. I've gotten to spend it on the beaches in Mexico. And now in hindsight, which is really what this book is about, I realize that horrible Newport smoking fiasco with Rose was the most significant New Year's of my life, because it was the day that I chose my life. It was the day that I chose to put my life before my desires, and that was the beginning of a new life.
Amazing. I love that. At 15 or 16?
I was almost 16 years old.
Almost 16.
Yeah.
Amazing. This connects to the next question I was going to ask you, which is, I know that there's been a lot written about AA and the 12 steps and tshuva, the Jewish idea of repentance and return, reconciliation. And I was so struck reading the book about the parallels between these systems that we have. Tshuva essentially was created so that people knew that there was a way back for them. That whatever you've done in the world, there's a way for you to begin to mend what you've broken. And so I was struck by a lot of the similarities, including the power of confession to relieve shame. And I wonder if you can talk about the part of the 12 steps that you found most resonant or most challenging in that process, and thereby really like what is so significant about the idea of tshuva, that change is actually possible for human beings?
It's a great question, and not one that I've been asked on this whole book tour, is like really to get into the nuts and bolts of what happened to me working through the 12 steps. alcoholism and addiction, which I don't even fully understand. I understand it less with each passing year. I feel like I have less of a grasp on it now than I did when I was 20, 21. I felt like I knew everything that there was to know about it. But I describe like alcoholism and addiction is like you're born wounded. You're born with a wound. And you're walking through the world with this wound that is ripping open deeper with every human experience that you have. And then you find alcohol and drugs and you pour them on the wound and you suddenly can't feel the wound anymore and you imagine that you've healed the wound. But actually you haven't healed the wound. What you found is the ultimate painkiller to make it feel like you don't have a wound at all. So you're walking with confidence and you're walking through the world with your chest held out and the wound is ripping deeper, so you have to drink more and get more high in order to not feel that wound. And eventually you get to this point where there is too much wound, there aren't enough drugs or alcohol in the world to take to make you not feel that wound, and you thought you'd healed it, but all you'd done is make it so you couldn't feel it. And what the 12 steps did for me was they began the process of healing that wound. And it was so painful because the first thing they asked me to do was to stop taking the painkillers. And so I felt myself in this raw state, and I did not think that I could ever recover from it. 6 days sober. How can I even get through one more day sober? Because I feel, and this is at 15. I mean, this is with very little damage done. I mean, a life in the bottle can be so difficult to get out of. And the 12 steps slowly but surely healed that wound to the degree that I felt like I could walk with my head upright and I could walk through the world a changed person. And so tshuva in particular, I had a lot of things that I had done in that short amount of time that I carried with me as a source of deep shame. I stole money from my mother. I was physically violent with my mother. I sold my stepfather's CDs, which were like his prize collection. And when I needed money to get high, I sold everything in sight. I had physically violent with my grandmother. I was such a mess of a person, and there was no. I'll tell you this. My grandmother was a lifelong ardent atheist. She hated religion, hated it with a passion. The only thing she hated more than religion was my grandfather. And right before she died, she said, I thank God every day that you're sober. She thanked a God she didn't even believe in for the fact that I was sober. And that, to me, that was true tshuva when she said that. Not that she believed, but that she was grateful enough that she was willing to even say something like that.
Incredible. It's incredible. I feel that there's some ways in which this book, I am sure, will save people's lives, and the AA chapter really made me feel that way. I mean, people, because they're drawn to your gorgeous cover and because you're funny and you make it easy to take these stories in, are going to read this and understand their loved ones who are struggling with addiction and maybe understand themselves. And it's really quite incredible. AA and IKAR, how are they similar and how are they different?
Oh.
I bet nobody's asked you that either.
No one has asked me that particular question.
Not yet.
No.
Okay.
Well, what I will say is interesting and unique about AA as opposed to other spiritual systems is that there is a price to entry into the 12 steps, and the price is pain. Now, everybody in the world has pain, obviously. IKAR is not immune from pain. But there's something unique about a spiritual community where the foundational baseline is that no one here is holy. Everyone here is broken. And I think that I don't know if that's not true about IKAR. The more I think about it, the more I think like just kind of everybody comes to spirituality and to God because of a feeling of brokenness. But there's more tattoos in AA.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But they sleep together less. I don't know, I'm guessing, but it feels right based on the laugh. Okay.
You might have a window into a part of the community I don't know so well. Okay, all right. So I'm gonna transition us to the. We're not gonna do all 6, but I want to transition us to talk about deafness. And I learned.
How is deafness and IKAR different? Here's what I think.
We actually are blessed tonight to have, I think, the first deaf woman rabbi in the world with us tonight. And so Rabbi Rebecca Dubois is here with her husband Michael, and we welcome you. Thank you for joining us tonight. I would love for you to educate us a little bit. You write so much about sign language and the gift of sign, the war on sign, the failures in deaf education, the beauty of deaf culture. Can you talk about the shift in the shift from deaf as a disability to deaf as culture?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you. I can talk about that by telling us the story of how I became a sign language interpreter. I had finally gotten my start in show business at 17 years old. I was working as a bear mascot on Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley, passing out flyers for a UC Berkeley memorabilia store called Bear Basics. And it was cool. I would go to a rave all night. I wouldn't sleep. I would arrive there at 11 a.m., having not slept, and I would buy a rave breakfast, which was a pack of Newports and a liter of Mountain Dew. And I would pass out flyers, and and then I would take smoke breaks. I would take the bear head off, put it on my head akimbo, and smoke a cigarette. And then invariably a kid would walk by and tug their mother's sleeve and go, "Why is the bear smoking?" And then I would say, "I'm smoking the bear, kid. Now buzz off," or whatever. And my mother, I was getting paid $4.25 an hour at Bear Basics, and my mother came to me and said, the Deaf Can program that she was the head of at Laney College, a community college in Oakland, is hiring interpreters. And would you like to throw your hat in the ring and be a sign language interpreter? And I said, absolutely not. I have no interest in cross-contaminating the trauma of my childhood with my employment. I'm in show business. I cannot leave this behind. And then she said, they're paying $13.25 an hour. And I said, I am a sign language interpreter. Now, I say cross-contaminate the trauma of my childhood. I do not feel in any way traumatized by my mother's deafness. I've always felt incredibly, unbelievably grateful and proud of her, and to be a coda, to be a child of deaf adults. That was a big part. I was fiercely proud of my mother, and she got her associate's degree, her bachelor's degree, her master's degree, all in night school, and it took her a long time to get those things. And I went to every graduation with my brother, and eventually she became the head of the Deaf Can program at Laney. Now, the trauma was that before the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, my mother, I was engaged in what all codas of that time, and maybe to this day are engaged in, which was a 15-year non-consensual sign language interpretation internship program. Which means every time we would go to an appointment, there would invariably not be an interpreter hired because it was an optional thing, and it would then fall to me at 8, 9, 10 years old to interpret for my mother, to get her SSI benefits, at emergency room visits. I mean, emergency room visits that if I, or my brother wasn't there as an 8-year-old or an 11-year-old boy, my mother would not get the vital medical information that she needed. And then, when I started becoming a juvenile delinquent, the topic of the meetings shifted slightly to become about me. And now I was charged with the task of interpreting meetings about which I was the subject. And then begins a very delicate dance where you have to, this is true interpretation, because you can't give over the unadulterated message, because then you're in big trouble, but you also can't give over we here at the Oakland Police Department think your son's A-okay, because then my mom will begin to smell a rat, right? So I have to go into a nuanced, he does have potential, there are some issues, but we think someday he'll be an author, perhaps. So I didn't want to be an interpreter, but I agreed to be an interpreter because of the payout. And I came to Laney College, and my mother sat me down in front of the head of the interpretation program, whose name was Catherine, who was a blind and deaf woman, who interviewed me by taking my hands and feeling with her hands where my signing register was at. And the fact that there was a deaf-blind woman interviewing me for a job at Laney College is a story of unbelievable, against all odds emancipation that starts in France in the 1700s. Prior to the 1700s, deaf people, there were not sign systems that had been established. And so if you were born deaf, the sole deaf child in a family, you were limited to whatever gestures you and your family could come up with in order to just do basic functional communication. But if you were lucky enough have a genetic component to the deafness in your family, and you had a sister or a brother that was born deaf too, then the two of you could trade language back and forth that you were creating in real time, literally creating a language of two. And that is what a hearing priest saw in the streets in France in the 1700s, was two sisters signing back and forth to each other. And he said, I know what this is. This is language. And if they can teach me this, I can teach them to take the sacrament. That was all he cared about, was giving them those God body biscuits. And he wanted to get them into heaven. And that makes sense. As a clergy member, you'll relate, right? Like, if there is a God, there's no question that he cannot let people that do not eat bread into heaven. Like, his hands are tied. But if he can teach them language, then they'd be able to do it. So he said, teach me. And they taught him. And then he taught them French. And then then he established this school for the deaf in France, which was the first school for the deaf in the world, and then the first recognized sign system in the world. And they would go on the road. They would do road shows. Literally, it would be a hearing educator and an array of gifted deaf students that there would be an audience like you, and the hearing educator would go, ask a question, and then the audience would ask a question, like a French question, like, what degree of suffering can be borne by man, or how many cremes is too many cremes for a ripe brie? And then the hearing educator would turn around and sign to the deaf students in French Sign Language, and they would walk up to a blackboard and write in perfect French, trois cremes. And people's minds were fucking blown. Like, they couldn't believe it. That started the signing system that emancipated the deaf, that crushed the disability of deafness and turned it into the culture of deafness that I was born into. And there was one student there named Laurent Clerc, who was maybe the biggest genius at the school of all. That man sailed to America with Thomas Gallaudet, and they set up a similar system here in America. They started American Sign Language, and that sign language traveled across the country to meet the California coast, to meet my mother when she was 13 years old. She'd been raised in an oralist milieu. She did not know she did not know sign language, and my grandmother walked into a cobbler's office and saw that this man was deaf. He had been raised also in an oral milieu. He had no deaf friends because he didn't sign. He had no hearing friends because oralism had failed him. And my grandmother said, my daughter's not going to deal with this. She put her into the school for the deaf in California. In 3 months, she was fully fluent in American Sign Language. In 20 years, she had a master's degree. And I was sitting in her office with a woman in sign language, holding my hands, feeling where I was at. And that is all one story. And that is the story, to me, of deaf emancipation.
Incredible. I know that you're a culture translator. You're giving us a window into these worlds, but you're also code switching right now, and I appreciate the parts of the story you've left out from this chapter from sharing at this dinner tonight. So, but you'll leave some to the imagination for folks who get the book.
Well,
so.
I mean, speaking of code switching, like, my life is in code switch. My life, I'm not deaf. I'm a coda, and I'm a member of the deaf community. And I describe it as being like born white in Wakanda. Like, you get a passport, but you can't wear the panther suit. You know what I mean? Like. In some ways, this is my story to tell, and in some ways, I'm honored to be able to tell it. It's not because it really is the story of the deaf and a community that I was lucky enough to be born into and to be a member of. Right. But I'm cognizant of that fact too.
And you also say that sign is literally your mother tongue, right? This is your. Right.
I signed before I talked, and my earliest memories are of moving fingers, and I'm lucky enough to feel fluent in American Sign Language, and to feel like I have a mastery of English. And I've never known what the phrase mother tongue means, because I'm more comfortable in English than I am in sign, but my mother is the one that gave me language in the first place, and that all comes from that story that started in an alley in Paris in the 1700s.
Incredible. Okay, we're going to do a few more.
Yeah.
So I mean, the main thing about Burning Man that I know we have a bunch of burners here. Is that the right lingo?
Oh, you got it. You nailed it, Rabbi.
Okay. So I want to just say briefly, I was so fascinated by the tech guys who show up with the fancy outfits to Burning Man, and like kind of go off into they hire people to clean up after themselves, and and you say something so profound, like, why do you go into an experience to have your life turned upside down only to then insulate yourself from actually being touched by that experience? And I feel like as a rabbi, I could resonate to that, and I just want to invite you to reflect on that for a moment, if you would.
Well, they say, there's a phrase I've heard about Burning Man, which is that Burning Man went from a place where weird people went to feel normal to a place where normal people go to feel weird. Yeah. And there is some truth to that. There definitely is. But there's something also that I've been thinking about a lot lately with Burning Man and like really what does it mean? And there's something that happens there even to this day that is, I was talking to my friend Duncan Trussell about this, that like the early psychedelic spiritual leaders, they asked this question when they came down off of the acid, who does the dishes, right? Like, okay, we just like sailed with Mother Ayahuasca, but like, who's doing the dishes? Things are dirty here. And what you hope is, when you get back to the practicality of life, you've been shifted in some permanent way by a psychedelic trip, by getting involved in a Jewish halachic experience, by going through the 12 steps. You hope that you've been shifted in some way. And so I think if Burning Man has any real power, it's that it can shift you in a way that feels permanent. So when you get back to your apartment and the dishes aren't done, you're a different person doing those dishes, Yeah. And I'll say this too for you, that you'll like this. For me, Burning Man always hits right before Rosh Hashanah. And it's become, for me, a part of my high holidays. And I know that sounds corny, but it really is. Like when I see this big burning statue, I am reminded of the temporariness of my life. I'm reminded that we are all like a man or a person or a woman or just a human about to catch fire. Life is so short and it's so impermanent. And while we are here, I want to live the best life that I can. My days of awe begin there. And that's when I start to take stock of the way that I want to change. And the way that I want to change, it's Yom Kippur for sure. Because it's like the book of life is being sealed. That's not really about, am I going to survive? Is God going to save me for a year? It's really about like, we're all going away. And while I'm here, I want to live the best, most life-filled life that I can. And that's, I think, the lesson that Burning Man gave me.
Wow, that not only helps me understand why tens of thousands of people go out to the desert to be dirty for a week, but also it helps me understand your brother and my sister-in-law. So thank you.
I'm glad to give you that gift.
Thank you for explaining that. You did. Okay, I want to talk about the Judaism section, and then we'll open it up for a couple questions, and before we wrap tonight.
Okay.
So
I've never done a book event where my child is literally trying to destroy it in real time. So this is also a first for me. All right, happy birthday. Okay. Oh, your jelly beans. Okay, yeah, no, now that makes a lot of sense. Okay, there we go. Well, apple doesn't fall too far from the tree.
Okay. What has become clear to me in the last, I would say, 8 or so years is that most people do not understand anti-Semitism. Even Jews don't really understand anti-Semitism. It feels like every day there are layers and layers of this that are getting exposed to us, and I feel, even as a rabbi, that I am constantly expanding my understanding of this thing that plagues us. But reading your chapter before you get to anti-Semitism, I realized that Judaism itself is part of what's so confusing. So you talk about how you say you can convert into Judaism the religion, but you can never convert out of Judaism the ethnicity. And I want to just give you a minute, if you will, to just explain, given your unique vantage point, because of the way that you grew up with your mother and also the way that you grew up with your father and his new family, if you can talk about what's so confusing to people about the Jews.
Well, I think it really depends on who you're talking about. Like I think I say in the book, but I always said, like, if you want to find out if Jews are white people, ask people that really, 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 really like white people, because they'll let you know. There's something confusing about the Jew, and obviously this is always through, when we even have these conversations, this is always through like an Ashkenazi kind of lens, which is admittedly the lens that most of these conversations get filtered through. But I think part of what's so confusing, in particular in America, to the anti-Semite is that the Jew looks like them. And that is a scary thing, that the Jew who wanders from community to community simultaneously is an other and looks like the same. And I think that there's something that really makes people scared of that you can simultaneously hold on to your otherness and also blend in. That's, I think, I'm not sure that's yes?
That's so interesting. You're saying to a white supremacist, a white Jew is even more threatening than a Jew of color.
Well, I don't even think to a white supremacist, Jews of color even enter into the framework, right? I don't even think there's a nuanced enough breakdown of what a Jew is. What they see is somebody that looks like them, but I call it in the book, to the anti-Semite, the Jew isn't just not white, they are the anti-white. They are the phantom race that is here to agitate and create. Isn't this good comedy stuff, by the way? I swear there is funny stuff in that chapter, but I really do believe that if you, unfortunately, I've looked into like online anti-Semitism more than I've had to, and part of being a Jew in the entertainment sphere, specifically in comedy, has meant coming, I'm sure you get them too, with death threats my entire career, apropos really, literally of just my existence. And you get into these spaces where those people really think that that's what we're doing here. We are here to agitate a race war. And I think that the fact that some Jews look white, and in some ways are white, is the thing that makes those anti-Semites so incredibly distrustful in some way.
So insidious. Yeah.
It's scary.
Yeah. So you speak about... You speak about anti-Semitism in such an interesting way, and I mean, there's one point where Dara Horn had this really interesting piece in The Atlantic this week that I think many people saw, where she's quoting David Nirenberg, actually, this idea that he writes about maybe 15 years ago or so, in his book on anti-Judaism, where he says, essentially, whatever plagued a society, the Jew became the embodiment of that this is part of our superpower, that we morph into whatever the evil is in a society. So in a society that that's really plagued by capitalism and exploitation, the Jew becomes the banker. And in a society that really hates communism, the Jews are, we're the communists. And in a society that is, that's really nationalistic, Jews are, instead are these kind of cultural elites that don't care about the nationalism. Yeah.
In the same war, in World War I, the Jews were both blamed for being the capitalist fat cats and the communist agitators.
Right.
Literally, we were both sides of the conflict.
Right. You write about this so powerfully, and so in other words, take that argument to its natural extension. What that means is that in some ways, anti-Semitism is an act of justice in the eye of the beholder, because they believe that they're actually fighting against these oppressive systems that are harming the regular people by fighting against the Jew. So of course, anti-Semitism is not part of the DEI structure, because ultimately DEI is about making a more just society. And so I think this is an interesting argument. I mean, that you put really good language around here. There's one, I wrote down this quote that you have here at one point, because you're talking about how anti-Semitism emerges in your space in particular, and how even friends and even, people who you really look up to in the field start to, put out some subtle and not so subtle anti-Semitic comments online, and you say basically that, and then the Jewish community freaks out, of course, and then those people who put those ideas out suggest that the backlash to this kind of hate speech is itself evidence of the very conspiracy theory that was espoused in the first place. In other words, we're in this no-win situation where somebody says something anti-Semitic, the Jews respond, and then that's just proof that the Jews control everything because look how the Jews are responding, and then this guy gets fired and this one whatever.
Right, Kanye gets fired from Adidas and it goes, look, they really do control everything.
Right,
and you're fucked
exactly.
because your choice is say nothing and accept the abuse, or say something and perpetuate the stereotype. And it is this kind of spiraling, no way out, no exit type of situation.
And you say that's gaslighting you never quite get used to, right?
Yeah, and then the worst part of all of that is like, as I say in the chapter, is you see people that you were peers with, people that you've worked with, people that you consider friends, kind of doing like a little wink to the language, to the hate speech in the first place, a little, where's the lie, a little, this resonates with me too, and then you start to get this feeling like, who can I trust? And that feeling like, who can I trust, is one that is simultaneously, I think all Jews kind of feel, and I think, for me, one that I have to use all of the power in my Jewish being to fight against, because I will not allow that kind of poison to make me distrust every person in the world. I will not allow myself to not be in the universe that I was born into. I won't allow anti-Semitism to create a wall. I mean, this is the community I come from. I mean, the Hasidic community, that was the choice they made after World War II, which is one that I understand, but one that I don't want to be involved in, which is that they said, there's nothing holy left in this world but us, so let's build a wall around us. And inside of that wall, a lot of unholy things happen, but at least it's our unholy stuff. I don't want to live behind walls. Like, I want to tear down walls, and I want to connect with people. That's really what the book is about, is me jumping over walls from community to community and finding my people, whether they're Jews, whether they're the deaf, whether they're people I danced with, whether they're people I burned with, whether they're other comedians. I love people. Even though I feel so betrayed by them so often, I still love people. And one thing I've been thinking a lot about with Judaism since October 7th is, I've been thinking about this a lot, is that it is an insufficient Jewish identity to have your whole Jewish identity be fear, pain, anger, guilt, anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is not Semitism. It cannot be my whole Semitic life. I have to find some laughter and some tears. I have to find joy in a Jewish experience, or what's the fucking point of doing this in the first place? So I need to squeeze out the laughter even in times when there's tears, and it doesn't give me an excuse to not pay attention to the tears as well.
Wow, I so deeply resonate to that. I was talking to my daughter earlier today, and she's our oldest is she's in a university that's really kind of at the epicenter of a lot of the anti-Semitism right now. And she was talking to one of her professors about it, and her professor said, well, I wonder if your parents experienced anti-Semitism when they were on campus, years ago. And so we were talking about this, there was a terrible Holocaust denialist who came to campus when in my first year of college, and I remember so clearly, and I think I gave a sermon about it at some point years ago, that I was so curious to hear him speak, because he was speaking, it was the spokesperson of the Nation of Islam, and he was coming to talk about the death of Malcolm X, which I thought, that's interesting. I wonder if he's going to admit it, And so I really wanted to go hear the talk, and when I approached the building, there was a massive protest, 400 Jews outside saying no anti-Semites on campus, and I felt so embarrassed. And I was like, also, where did all these Jews come from? Because I haven't seen them at all. And then I went in, I sat in this session. Of course, he was like, your so-called Holocaust and Jew York City and all the things. And so I stormed out. I grabbed my 18 bags that I had with me, and I stormed out, and he shouted at me, and I shouted at him. And then I went outside, and I saw those Jews outside in a totally different light. And then a couple of days later, there was a letter that was put into the mailbox of every person with a Jewish-sounding name. And it basically said, I was there and saw that hundreds of students protested against this anti-Semite, but a couple days later, or a few days before, was Simchat Torah, and there were 3 Jews and a Torah on the steps. What does it mean to have a Jewish identity that really comes alive one time and one time only, when people want to kill us? How can you live like that? And it definitely, I was 17 when that happened. It planted a really important seed for me here, which is like, how do you build a community that's very honest about what the threats are, and like, we're not going to pretend that it's not real, and also we want to dance, and we want to we want to learn, and we want to be proud of who we are, and proud of our identity. We want to build a more just society. We want our Judaism to manifest in acts of service and love and justice. And so I feel, for me, that was a very formative and transformative experience too.
That's like that's to me super beautiful. Like that. I don't think that ignoring the pain of our people is even possible. So it doesn't even matter. But I do think ignoring the joy that are contained in this community is something that people have been able to do very effectively. And so I feel like, for me, and I think, you know, my brother's connected to it. He's kept me grounded in a Jewish milieu. But like, really, for me, how I found that joy, because I wasn't raised in a joyful Jewish experience. My Jewish life was embarrassing and shame-filled, and it was very temporary. I say in the book, like, I had both a more and less Jewish upbringing than any of the Jews that I know. Like 6 weeks a year, I was like in this hyper-concentrated Yiddish-speaking community where we would play dodgeball games with the ultra-Orthodox kids versus the actual religious kids. And then I would just go back to Oakland Public Schools and forget that it ever happened. And when I finally found drugs, I was like, goodbye. And then when I found the 12 steps, I thought, this is a spiritual community that I can actually get on board with. 12 is way easier than 613. Wow. I'm doing this.
Wow.
And then my dad got sick.
Yeah.
When I was 20, and I flew back home, and I went through the process of watching him die. And then I sat Shiva for him, and the comfort and the unbelievable healing that the Jewish mourning ritual gave to me was something that I wasn't prepared for. How healing it was for me. And then I got to come back to California after sitting Shiva for him, and with my brother. My brother did it more fastidiously than I did. He does everything Jewish more fastidiously than I do. But I would go once a week to shul, and I would try to say Kaddish for my dad once a week. And over the course of that year of saying Kaddish for him, you know, I mean, I used to walk into a temple with, forgive me, with women wearing kippot and go like, what is this? It's like, what? Like, I like listen to Too Short and go to Burning Man, and then I go to temple and I'm like, no, this is not right. Like, well, I don't know what. It was this like aesthetic kind of holy of holies inside of my body, and I like got to deconstruct that and toss it out, and then I got to like start this experience where the Judaism that I could connect to became mine. And I got to have this experience that was filled with joy and dancing. And like, as Hasidic as the community I was raised in was, I don't remember a lot of dancing. There was a lot of muttering, but there was not much dancing. And then I got to dance in shul, and then I got to go to all the holidays on my own accord. And then I got to have this Judaism that belonged to me. And in that way, like my dad, as misguided as some of the communal choices I think he made were, he gave me a connection to my people, but he never got to see it. But maybe on some weird level, he does see it right now.
Well, I just want to say, when you wrote about your father's death, and maybe it's because I'm in a vela this year and in my own grief for my father, but I just felt the language was so beautiful, the way that you describe this. You have this sentence, I would have gotten used to his wasting form like eyes getting used to the dark. Had you gone home a little bit earlier, you were regretting that David got there before you did. And I'm just so moved by the way that you describe those final hours and final days with him.
It was painful. I mean, maybe to lighten things up, I can tell you a funny story that happened at his deathbed. One of the weird quirks of ultra-Orthodox Judaism is, or maybe just this community, I don't even know. Maybe it's maybe you tell me, maybe it's in this community too. When my father passed over from like hope into planning, you know, for that moment, that horrible, sickening moment where you have to make peace with the fact that this person you love is going to die. All of a sudden, this like phalange of distant cousins began to arrive at the hospital to like watch over the body. And so I had to put all of my like voodoo stuff away. I was going to do this like incantation and stuff, but so I had this weird moment, this weird experience of like this most intimate of moments, sitting at the deathbed of a loved one with truly the people that had made me feel like so ashamed and embarrassed my entire life, just like a weird cousin, like looking over me to make sure I wasn't like throwing holy water on my dad or whatever. And it was so bizarre. But I was 20, and I was like a rave kid, and I had my ears pierced, and I had like plugs in my ear, and I kind of just was like feeling myself a little bit. So I got into these like debates with them, and we would go back and forth about Judaism and why I was the way I was. And then one night, my cousin Shmilu, he hadn't spoken to me at all. By the way, Shmilu has an Eastern European accent. He's a third-generation American. His father does not have an Eastern European accent. His father sounds like a Yankees fan. He sounds like an extra from Dr. Zhivago, and because he was raised in Yiddish. And one night, late at night, he's like, so you're not religious, eh? I'm not very good at the accent. He goes, you're not religious? I go, no. He goes, can I tell you something? Something I've never been able to tell anyone in my family. And I go, oh, great. He's gay. Like, he's gay. I'm from California. It is my mandated duty to love and accept him when he says I'm gay. But he didn't fucking love and accept me my entire childhood when I was just trying to read an English siddur in a Yiddish-speaking synagogue. Okay, fine. So I'm like trying to like practice. Okay, when he says you're gay, you say I love and accept you no matter what. He says you're gay, I love and accept you no matter what. He's like, I've always wanted. I go, I know. You've always wanted to be gay. I love and accept you no matter what. He's like, I've always wanted. I'm like, yes, he's going to say to love a man. I get it. I love and accept you no matter what. He's like, I've always wanted to be a lawyer. A lawyer. I go, a lawyer? You're a lawyer? Just be a lawyer. He goes, oh, no, mommy would never let. Mommy would never let? I mean, how crazy is that? His darkest secret would be any other Jewish family's wet dream. And as far as I know, he has never tasted the sybaritic decadence of land perpetuity contract law and is still studying the Talmud.
You know what? It's a hard time for Jews, but we have right here 2 Jews who wrote books about mourning rituals and how they change people's lives, and they're both national bestsellers.
Yeah!
So that's
I love
great.
that.
Okay, why don't we take a couple of questions and then we'll wrap up, folks.
Yeah.
Do we have
call on people?
Okay,
Can you?
I can't see who that is, but oh, okay.
Yeah,
Ben will call him.
Ben.
Please say your name and stand if you can.
Hi. Can you hear? Okay, it's working. Hi, I'm Melissa. Nice to meet you all. So I've been a fan of yours since I saw a Comedy Central special like years ago, and one of the things that really stood out to me, honestly, was your name and that you didn't change it. And you're talking about like being Jewish and working in the industry and all that stuff, and also I've been listening to Barbra Streisand's Memoir and gotten to the bit where she's like, I didn't want to change my name, so I took a letter out. You know, like, what sort of, like, how has your name impacted your work? And then also, like, was there any pressure from, say, agents or managers or anything to have you change your name? Because it's very rare to have a Jewish, and for an industry that is so full of Jewish storytellers and creators, everyone is changing their name and always have been. But then when I see your name showing up, I'm always like, oh, look at him, he didn't change it.
I opened for Patrice O'Neill once, and he came on stage, he goes, ugh, Moshe Kasher? Your name might as well be Jewish. I remember also I opened for this comedian, David Feldman, a great comic, and he argued with himself about whether or not I should change my name for an hour. He's like, you can't be in the entertainment industry, Moshe Kasher, you gotta change your name. Oh, what am I talking about? You can't change your name. We can't let these anti-Semites win. No, the truth is you're never gonna and I go, dude, I'm not thinking about changing my name. But I did change my name. This almost feels like a setup. I did change my name. But I changed it in the opposite direction. When I was born, this is a longer story. Is that okay? Do we have time? I'll make it quick. I'll try to make it quick. I'll make it quick.
Okay, it's a good one.
My mother, in the Jewish religion, the father is granted the benefit of being able to name the second-born son. The firstborn is for mom, the second one is for dad. My dad, when I was born, declared my name Moshe. And my mom said, no way, we can't name the guy Moshe. That's a terrible name. It sounds like moose. We'll name him Mark. Now, let's all keep in mind that my mother was born deaf, has never heard the name Moshe, nor the word moose, nor the name Mark for that matter. But somehow I ended up Mark Moshe Kasher. And it was the one battle that my father never stopped fighting. My whole life, he would call me Moshe, my brother would call me Mo, and my mother would call me Mark Moose Kasher. And I was Mark all through my childhood. That was my name. And when I got sober, I was in this desperate need for a new identity and for a new life. And there's a video game called Katamari Damacy. It's a classic video game where you play this little prince who pushes around this ball, and you pick up bigger and bigger pieces of things through the video game. A little piece of dander, a dandelion, a thimble, then a car, then a building, then the roads and the mountains, and eventually the ball gets so big that it's used to rebuild the moon itself. The second rave I ever went to was it was called a full moon party. And it was on the night of the full moon. It was a free party, a legendary free party in San Francisco. And when I got sober, I was like that little prince, pushing a ball around, picking up pieces of trauma, a little handcuffs here, a little arrest there, violence. And when I got to AA, the ball was bigger than it towered over me. And I asked the people in AA, like, what do I do with this ball? And they said, stop running. And I said, stop running? You sure? It's really seeming dangerous. They go, stop running, trust me. So I stopped running, and the ball ran me directly over, and they all laughed at me. I go, you're laughing? That hurt. They go, yeah, it hurts. I go, what do you mean it hurts? You knew this was going to happen? I go, what do I do? And they walked over with a hammer and a chisel, and they said, you get to work. And so I started chiseling away at that ball. And that night, at that first full moon party, I brought that big ball down with me onto the beach to rave. And I sat down at that party, and I was ready for a change. And I was sitting at this bonfire, and the ball was there raving next to me. And this girl at this bonfire, we were going around the bonfire, and this girl named Alona said, what's your name? And I said, and I looked at the ball, and I looked at the full moon, and I looked at her, and I said, it's Moshe. And that was the first time I ever went by my real name. And I go to Alona, I said, have you met my ball? And it had disappeared, and the full moon was shining a little bit brighter, and I've never gone by anything but Moshe since.
Beautiful. Okay, maybe one last question. Ben, did you have somebody? Okay. Yeah. Okay, and then we'll wrap after.
So I just had a quick question on what of the 12 steps, do you think people could apply for the mental health? Because I don't necessarily deal with addiction, but trauma is something I deal with. So what of the 12 steps would help you, helps with mental health?
Oh, I think that, I'm not a mental health expert either, despite the fact that I was in therapy from the age of 4 until I was 16. I think that the 12 steps, much like the Torah, much like the Quran, much like the Bhagavad Gita and every other spiritual system, they're like, what do they say? They're like windows all looking in at the same thing. And I think that the 12 steps can be applied to any problem. They cannot solve every problem. I don't even know how much they can solve my problems, but they certainly can't hurt. So when it comes to mental health, again, I think that the 12 steps are unbelievably helpful for me to get in touch with what's really going on. Specifically around trauma, I could say that around trauma, writing an inventory for me was incredibly useful because it was just so helpful for me to take all the stuff that was swimming around in my brain and that specifically I'd been trying to avoid that was living in my brain and put it all down on paper and look at this inanimate object that held all of my trauma and go, it's all here. And then I looked up at someone that I could trust and I read all of that stuff to that person. I don't know if that's, again, I'm not a mental health expert, but for me, that was incredibly freeing to take the trauma from out of here where I was trying to mitigate it and manage it using the very thing that was damaged by the trauma and put it down here onto something that couldn't hurt me anymore.
Amazing. Friends, this is Moshe Kasher. That was an incredible conversation.
Oh, for me too.
The book is called Subculture Vulture. There is always room for a Kasher in this place, so I'm just telling you and your brother, we love when you're here, and we hope that you will be back often.
Well, can I say that I was so deeply honored that you asked me to do this, and I'm so eternally grateful that it was the unbelievable pull, a gravitational pull of your community that brought my family together in a very real way. You're the reason that my family's all in Southern California, and that is something I will always be grateful to you for, and for the work that you do in the world. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to express my gratitude to our wonderful interpreters tonight. We thank you so much. To Ben and Elise and our whole staff, and the wonderful folks in the kitchen who made this beautiful dinner tonight, and it would really help. Thank you to Del Cielo. It would really help if folks could clear their tables and just come over here and bus on the side. Then they can quickly, they're going to be back early in the morning for tomorrow. So thank you all so much for being with us, and we'll do a quick Birkat Hamazon, so you can feel free to bus or join me, or both. Shir